Chapter 12. A wee saunter with Tashi before my niece's Highland wedding. I had thought a Highland road trip with Mum and Tashi might be fun, but the reality turned out to be somewhat different to how I'd imagined it. My first mistake was to opt for the longer scenic route, rather than the quicker, more direct route that Google suggested. My meticulous planning also failed to consider the needs of my passengers. Firstly, my mother, a sometimes prickly 79-year-old matriarch with vascular dementia and a notoriously weak bladder. Add a feisty senior dog that tended to bark like a demon in a stationary car, and you have all the ingredients needed for a happy family outing to hell. Rachel and Den's Scottish wedding was taking place in the splendid D-side village of Banchory, which is about 140 miles from Glasgow by the quickest route. My brother Neil, being the proud father of the bride, was paying for our weekend's accommodation at the Raymore Hotel, and conveniently this was also the wedding venue. I was pleased to note that the establishment welcomed well-behaved canine guests, and indeed had its own resident doggy host to greet them with a welcome treat bag on their arrival. Tashi would have to be on his very best behaviour, and a stern lecture on indiscriminate barking at strangers was given prior to our departure. He seemed to listen attentively, and I could only hope my words would be taken on board. There was one problem. The hotel didn't allow smoking in its rooms, and this was a very big concern for my dear old mum. Of course, Mum was not nearly ready when Tashi and I arrived in Lesmahago to pick her up. Instead, I found her puffing away happily and watching daytime telly at stun volume. Now, this was despite her earnest assurances on the telephone the previous night that she would be ready for the off on her arrival. Luckily, the care staff had packed her bags with the wedding outfit and the other necessities for a weekend stay at a posh Highland retreat. We are almost out the door when Mum asks a question I've already answered on 3 occasions. "Did you get me cigarettes, David?" "Yes, all taken care of, Mum. Just need to get you in the car now. I'm not wearing that hat, you know, so you can just leave it behind." "Hats are a wedding tradition, Mum. It's coming with us." "I don't like hats. My head's too small for them." "I have the opposite problem. My head's too big for them." "Are you cold? Will I put the heating on?" We made a later than anticipated departure from Auchlochan, but even so, still entertaining an air of optimism, I decided to stick with the longer scenic route that I'd chosen. We made our first emergency comfort break at the hideous burger and entertainments complex, located underneath the Kingston Bridge in Glasgow. Naturally, being a Saturday, there was no parking to be had, so I just drew up outside the obvious ladies' facilities, and Mum toddled off towards them, handbag in one hand and trusty stick in the other. At this point, Tashi was still sleeping and snoring contentedly on the back seat, and if dear old Mum had been quicker about her business, he might have stayed that way. In Tashi's brain, a prolonged stop usually meant we were getting out of the car to climb a hill, and this would always prompt a bout of joyous, anticipatory barking. He was in good voice by the time Mum emerged from the ladies' restroom, beaming befuddled wonderment at us. I am afraid this was only the foretaste to many such prolonged comfort stops that day, and then the oil warning light came on somewhere between Blair Gowrie and Braemar, so enforcing the 7th stop of the day at the hideous ski facilities in Glenshee. I opened the VW's bonnet and pretended to check the oil level. I knew from experience that this action would at least put the offending light off for another 50 miles, and I could then forget about it and hope for the best. Hoping for the best is the only solution I have for car maintenance problems. As we are about to set off again, Mum decides she'd better make use of the facilities before we do, and toddles off, leaving me to pace the car park with a feisty Apso who now thinks we're heading up a hill. To my dismay, Mum needs another comfort stop in Braemar, and then we enjoy a half-hour in pleasant reminiscence about a family New Year spent there many moons ago. At this point we have 2 hours of daylight remaining to us, and 7 hours has elapsed since we set off from Lesmahago with our great expectations. As we leave Braemar, I am supremely confident we will make it to Banchory before another comfort break is required. But alas, this would not be the case. Somehow I managed to take a slightly longer and more twisting road, and somewhere in the Badlands between Braemar and Banchory, Mum made that by then only too familiar plea. "I need to go again, David." "Should be in Banchory real soon, Mum. Only 10 miles to go," I offered hopefully. "I really don't think I can wait that long, David." I allowed silence to fall between us, hoping for once vascular dementia would give me a break and Mum would forget her pressing need for a bit longer. I reluctantly pull into a lonely passing place, and then Tashi and I watch as Mum toddles off up a rough country track, overhung by trees on each side, clutching her precious handbag and brandishing that trusty NHS metal stick. After about 100 metres, she obviously spots a likely bush and disappears into the woods. Now, I'd advised and cautioned against this al fresco expedition, and I was far from happy about it. After a couple of minutes of anxious waiting, there is still no sign of her re-emerging from the bushes, and it's looking like Tash and I might have to mount a recovery mission. There is much relief when I spot this indomitable 79-year-old emerging from the bushes, hitching her breeks and looking around trying to locate her travelling companions. I wave a greeting in her direction, and she toddles towards us, beaming perfect contentment. It was nearly dark when we arrived at the wedding venue in Banchory. I had by then been clinging on to my mask of saintly patience for way too long to be anything but surly in disposition. Mum emerged from my trusty old VW with the grace of a duchess, beaming at her waiting family and greeting them without a care in the world. Neil wrongly chose to ask what had kept us, as we were well over our anticipated ETA. "Never again," I snapped. "The road trip was a big mistake." The following morning I was in better spirits, and by happy circumstance the standard route to the nearby Hill of Fare started more or less outside the hotel, and this gave me and the wee man the opportunity to wander up Craigrath and the Hill of Fare on the morning of the wedding. Craigrath, at a modest 436 metres, would, I assumed, require minimal effort, and we could always curtail our route there if need be. Not missing Rachel and Den's wedding was obviously crucial. The Hill of Fare is a slightly less modest 471 metres, and according to my map it lies about a mile further on from our first objective, and apparently finding the summit cairn amongst the heather moorland can be difficult. The most curiously named summit of this mini-range is Blackie Duds, but that was an awkwardly placed outlier that we would not be visiting today. Surprisingly, Tashi was highly reluctant at the off, and he stubbornly refused to proceed beyond the start point. The aspiring pack leader was subsequently forced to stride off and leave him sulking with his particular brand of Apso determination for company. I was perhaps 100 metres further up the track when he reluctantly decided to follow on obediently. dragging his Flexi 3 lead after him. Tashi had no choice but to drag his lead, since it was still attached to his collar. I should point out that the Flexi 3 is designed for a much larger dog than my wee man. Tashi's request was clear enough, though. He didn't want to be on the lead. I gave him his freedom, and thereafter we proceeded without further canine machinations until reaching the summit of Craigrath. Slightly behind schedule, it has to be said. The views afforded of Deeside are expansive, and the skies big and open, with the distant brooding Cairngorm Mountains dominating the northern horizon. The light is gloomily spectacular, and the opal skies twinkle magically above us. But alas, my point-and-shoot Fuji barely does them justice. Not that this matters much with an audiobook. To here we had made rather slow progress, and the advancing time now dictated that we had to head back down for showers before the wedding. Tashi had other ideas. My little dog wanted to bag the highest summit, or it wasn't a Maryland tick. He starts hurtling off up the track, chasing after two runners already well on their way towards the wooden hut that marked the turn-off point for the Hill of Fare. "Oh, come on, big yin, you're no thinking about turning back, are ye? There's plenty of time, and so what if we miss the start of the wedding? That kilt of yours is a right disaster anyway. Tashi, come back. I'm reading a poem at the wedding, and it doesn't matter that I've ruined my kilt with a cheap home alteration. We have to be there, Tashi. Tashi!" My pleas are falling on deaf ears. Nothing unusual in that, I suppose. I am forced into a pursuit, and this time I have to catch up. And this is going to be difficult, as Tashi now thinks we are playing chase. We have nearly reached the hut when I gasp to a stop, and Tashi trots back to me quite full of himself. The summit is only a short trudge through the heather from here, but if we choose to make it, then we will probably be late for the wedding. Some summits are sacred, Tashi, and must be left inviolate. From here it counts as a tick, and nobody'll know. I don't believe I'm hearing this, big yin. Come on, it's just a wee romp across the heather, and you're no fooling this old dog with that sacred summit guff. I let him see his detested lead, and he follows me back down with a sullen air, while I recite Touched by an Angel by Maya Angelou to those amazing Deeside skies and the distant Cairngorm Mountains. After all, even a middle-aged actor has to rehearse, and I was due to recite this poem at Rachel and Den's wedding. We made it down with time to spare, and I can confess to a degree of smugness at an uncommonly rare victory over Tashi La's dogged determination. I let him shower first. Did we climb the Hill of Fare? Yes and no, but I logged it as a Tashi anyway. Naturally, I didn't tell my brother, or indeed Rachel and Den, how close we had come to missing the wedding. And while young and old enjoyed the evening ceilidh, Tashi and I snuck off early to watch the rugby on TV. I forget who won now, but it wasn't Scotland.